The Windsor Art Charity Exhibition. Every year, a splash of color against the stoic gray of the castle walls. A chance for the royals to show they're not just about tiaras and titles, but culture and caring too. This year, the theme was a green future, a cause close to King Charles's heart. But behind the polite smiles and champagne flutes, a drama was brewing, a storm ready to break with the force of a winter gale. It all centered around two young women, each on the cusp of defining their place in the royal orbit, but with vastly different trajectories. On one side, Lady Louise Windsor, daughter of Prince Edward, a young woman known for her quiet dedication and burgeoning artistic talent. On the other, Lola Parker Bowles, granddaughter of Queen Camilla, a socialite accustomed to the spotlight and the privileges that came with it. Louise, unassuming and grounded, had poured her soul into her artwork, a series of paintings depicting endangered landscapes, each canvas a silent plea for conservation. There was a raw honesty in her work, a genuine passion that resonated with viewers. Critics whispered praise, not just for the technical skill, but for the urgent message woven into every brushstroke. Louise was an artist, not by royal decree, but by genuine calling, and the public, weary of manufactured celebrity, adored her for it. Lola, by contrast, was a creature of carefully constructed image. Every dress designer, every smile meticulously rehearsed. She was beautiful, undeniably, and used to being the center of attention. Camilla, ever the doting grandmother, had orchestrated Lola's debut at the exhibition, a calculated move to elevate her granddaughter's standing. But the plan backfired spectacularly. The spotlight, instead of illuminating Lola, only served to highlight the stark contrast between her and Louise. Every compliment directed at Louise felt like a personal slight, every admiring glance a dagger to Lola's carefully cultivated ego. The whispers started subtly, then grew louder, impossible to ignore. "She really is the future of this family," one columnist remarked, loud enough for Lola to hear. No noise, no scandal, just truth and dedication. Lola felt invisible, a gilded ornament overshadowed by Louise's quiet radiance. The designer gown suddenly felt cheap, the practiced smile strained. Louise, with her effortless grace and genuine talent, had become a mirror reflecting Lola's own insecurities. The afternoon became a battleground, a personal referendum on Lola's worth. She laughed too loudly, adjusted her neckline with nervous energy, desperately seeking the attention that stubbornly remained fixed on Louise. Envy, a slow-burning ember, began to ignite. The climax arrived during the lunchtime recess. As guests drifted towards the state dining rooms, a small brass key, carelessly left on a workbench in the strictly off-limits creativity suite, caught Lola's eye. It was an invitation, a dare. With practiced ease, she pocketed the key, a flicker of dark possibility igniting within her. The initial impulse wasn't outright destruction, but a desperate need to find a flaw in Louise's masterpiece, something to justify the injustice she felt. But as the cool metal touched her palm, a darker impulse took hold. Power, malice, the chance to rewrite the narrative. If no one will look at me, she thought, I'll make them look. The plan crystallized, ugly and irresistible. Remove Louise's moment of glory, and the spotlight would finally shift to Lola. The lunchtime hush descended, a gift wrapped in danger. With her heart pounding, Lola slipped away from the group and made her way to the creativity suite. The small key turned in the lock with a treacherous click. Inside, bathed in soft northern light, stood Louise's painting, and Lola's world was about to implode. The masterpiece loomed, a vibrant tapestry of forest and ocean, a testament to Louise's dedication. For a fleeting moment, Lola glimpsed the artistry, the undeniable talent that had captivated the room. The painting breathed with life, a silent plea for a world on the brink. The recognition stung, a sharper insult than any she had imagined. This was beyond her reach, a summit she could never conquer, no matter how perfectly she played the role. The ache morphed into something colder, more calculating. Her eyes landed on a jar of Indian ink, a dark abyss sitting innocently on a nearby table. Her hand moved with a will of its own, fingers trembling yet resolute. She lifted the jar, the dark liquid sloshing ominously. The first drop splattered onto the canvas, a black tear staining the emerald depths of Louise's forest floor. Then another followed, and another, each drop a deliberate act of desecration. The jar tilted fully, unleashing a torrent of black ink that cascaded across the artwork, obliterating months of meticulous work, drowning the delicate play of light and shadow Louise had so painstakingly created. The ink hissed softly as it seeped into the dry paint, a sinister whisper in the silent room. It was over in seconds, a swift and brutal act of artistic murder. Lola stood paralyzed, panting, staring at the devastation she had wrought. A savage thrill surged through her, quickly followed by a wave of nausea and panic. She had to escape. She had to somehow undo the damage. An impossible feat, but the silence shattered. Not a crash, not a shout, but something far more terrifying. King Charles stood framed in the doorway, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. He must have been taking a shortcut from the private apartments, perhaps intending to admire the artworks one last time before the afternoon's events. The gentle kindness that usually softened his features had vanished, replaced by a granite hardness. His eyes locked onto Lola's, unwavering and unforgiving. No words were needed. The scene spoke volumes. Lola, caught red-handed, her fingers stained with black ink, standing before the desecrated painting, the evidence undeniable. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Finally, the king spoke, his voice low, almost conversational, yet carrying the full weight of centuries of monarchy. "Walk with me." 3 words, nothing more. The creative suite fell silent once more. Lola understood with a chilling clarity that every privilege, every shield of family protection had just crumbled into dust behind that closed door. The bell that signaled the end of the lunchtime recess rang out that afternoon like a death knell. It was no longer a polite summons, but a sovereign's command, absolute and urgent. King Charles had ordered every soul back into the main exhibition hall. Within minutes, the vast room was packed, yet not a whisper stirred. The air crackled with tension, anticipation, and dread. All eyes were fixed on the center of the hall. There stood the king, ramrod straight, his face carved from ice. Beside him trembled Lola Parker Bowles, the poised, radiant girl of the morning, now a pale, shaking figure with tear-swollen eyes and ink-stained hands. Lady Louise was escorted in last. The moment her eyes fell on the ruined canvas, the color drained from her face. Pain flickered across it, not loud or dramatic, but deep and profound. She didn't glance at Lola, the betrayal too raw for acknowledgement. Queen Camilla, dragged from the dining room without explanation, took in the scene in a single shattering moment. Her granddaughter paraded like a common criminal, her husband's face contorted with a fury she had never witnessed. A chill crawled up her spine. She searched Lola's eyes for some sign of innocence, some explanation, but found only despair. Then her gaze shifted to the destroyed painting. Comprehension struck her like a physical blow. When she turned back to Lola, the protective warmth that had always shone in her eyes was gone, replaced by something cold and irrevocable. That look was the final blow. Lola's last defense crumbled. Sobs tore from her throat. Between gasps, she confessed, her voice a broken whisper, admitting to the jealousy, the envy that had driven her to such an act of destruction. The king waited until the hall was silent once more. Then he spoke, not of the ruined canvas, but of something far more significant. Lola had not merely damaged a painting, she had defiled the very purpose of the day. She had dragged petty envy into a space dedicated to the greater good. For one who carried the blood of the crown, that transgression crossed a line from which there could be no return. It was a breach of trust, not only against him, but against the institution itself. The sentence was delivered without emotion. Lola Parker Bowles would apologize publicly to Lady Louise Windsor. In the suffocating silence, Lola lifted her head. Through tears, she tried to meet Louise's eyes, but found only the blurred outline of a dignity she had tried to destroy. The words of apology came out broken, half swallowed by shame. Then, before the hastily summoned press cameras, 2 liveried footmen stepped forward. Their movements were precise, ceremonial. The great doors of Windsor Castle were opened wide. Lola Parker Bowles was escorted out. Under the relentless glare of flashing bulbs, she crossed the threshold. Behind her, the doors closed with the soft finality of a coffin lid. When the great doors of Windsor Castle thudded shut behind Lola's disgrace, the silence that followed in the great hall was not relief. It was the hush that settles over a battlefield after the first cannon has fired. Lady Louise did not linger for whispers or pitying glances. With a composure that startled even those who knew her best, she walked straight back to the creativity suite. The air inside was acrid with spilt ink and betrayal. Black streaks scarred the floorboards. The easel stood like a gallows. At its center, her masterpiece bore a brutal, gaping wound, a violent slash of black that had torn through the harmony of forest and ocean, trying to silence the quiet plea for life she had painted into every brushstroke. Louise stood before it, no tears, no fury, then something harder than anger rose in her, resolve. Giving up was not in her nature. This painting was not just hers. It was a voice for the cause, a promise to the planet. To let it die would be to hand victory to malice. She rolled up her sleeves, drew a steadying breath, and began. First came the meticulous cleansing. With solvents and the softest cloths, she coaxed the destructive ink from the canvas fibers millimeter by millimeter, the way a surgeon removes poison without killing the patient. Every motion was deliberate, unhurried, wordlessly. Other artists and staff slipped in behind her. No speeches, no condolences, just fresh brushes, professional restoratives, a kettle of warm water. They formed a quiet circle of solidarity, turning the room from a crime scene into a sanctuary. Time was merciless. The gala auction was only hours away. Louise worked without pause. Each new stroke did not merely cover the damage. It transformed it, where the ink had ravaged. She now laid deeper shadows and fiercer glimmers of light, weaving the scar into the story. The ruined center became a testament. Destruction had come, but life had refused to yield. At some point, a tall figure appeared in the doorway. King Charles entered alone, without ceremony. He watched in silence as her brush danced across the canvas, restoring what had been violent. He said nothing about the incident. There was no need. When the moment felt right, he simply crossed the room and rested a hand on her shoulder. His voice, when it came, was almost a whisper. Thick with pride, he rarely allowed himself to show. What happened today, Louise, only confirms what I have long believed. You embody the finest values this family can offer, not in ease, but in rising. The word struck deeper than any public ovation could have. A quiet smile touched her lips. As the light in the high window shifted to the amber of approaching dusk, Louise laid down her brush for the last time. The canvas glowed. Where the savage streak had tried to kill it, a new richness now lived. Depth born of wounding, beauty forged in survival. She stepped back and studied her work one final time. It was ready, and so was she. Dusk settled over Windsor Castle, and the final auction began. Crystal chandeliers blazed, washing the great hall in a warm ceremonial glow that felt worlds away from the afternoon storm. The scandal, the judgment, the exile, all of it had been swept to the edges of the room. Every eye now burned with a single anticipation: the reappearance of the painting that had risen from its own ashes. Lady Louise stepped forward. She wore the same simple morning dress, now immaculate, not a trace of black ink remaining. She walked slowly, steadily, beside the tall easel that carried green intersection. Gone was the quiet uncertainty of the morning. In its place stood an unforced serenity that made the room feel suddenly smaller, as though the light itself had decided to gather around her. When she reached her place, the entire hall rose as one. It was not polite applause. It was a spontaneous, roaring ovation that rolled on, refusing to die. They were clapping for the art, yes, but more for the spirit that had refused to break, for the young woman who had turned deliberate destruction into deeper beauty, for the values the day had been saved from disgrace. The sound swelled until Louise, eyes shining, bowed low in genuine gratitude. The auctioneer took the podium. He did not shy from the afternoon's events. He framed them as proof that art and charity can survive even the ugliest assault. Then he unveiled the restored green intersection. Bidding erupted instantly. Paddles flashed, discreet nods rippled through the front rows, and the price climbed with dizzying speed, far beyond any estimate ever placed on a work by a young royal. The miracle of its survival, the story of its artist's grace under fire, and the king's unflinching justice had transformed the canvas into something priceless. When the hammer finally fell, the figure shattered every record of the night. The Environmental Trust received a sum so vast it guaranteed the exhibition would be remembered as the most successful in its history. In that triumph, Lola Parker B.S.'s tragedy was sealed. Somewhere beyond the castle walls, she was already grappling with screaming headlines and a lifetime ban from the world she had coveted. The stain of envy would follow her forever. Queen Camilla endured the evening with regal composure, but inside she carried the bruise of a grandmother forced to watch blood ties severed for the greater good. She understood painfully that Charles's severity had been the only way to protect the crown's integrity. King Charles, by his uncompromising verdict, had drawn a line in marble. No favoritism, no exceptions. The message rang clear across the kingdom. The monarchy stands for decency, and decency is not negotiable. Louise, almost without seeking it, had become the new emblem of dignity and resilience. The light that now surrounded her was entirely her own. Long after the hall emptied and the chandeliers dimmed, Louise returned to the creativity suite one last time to gather her things. Among the scattered brushes and rags, she found a small vellum envelope, no name on the outside. Inside a few handwritten lines, it was your kindness that brought the light back. She never discovered who wrote it. It hardly mattered. The last rays of the Windsor sunset streamed through the high windows, striking the now empty space where her painting had stood. The room glowed softly as though the canvas had left some of its radiance behind. Louise smiled. True light, she understood at last, does not come from flashbulbs or stolen attention. It belongs to those who never try to seize it by tearing others down, but who build it, stroke by patient stroke, with sincerity and endurance. The story of envy and destruction was over. The story of healing and grace had only just begun. The question hangs in the air, doesn't it? Was Charles's sentence too severe? A lifetime banishment for a young woman, even one guilty of such a spiteful act. Some would argue for leniency, a second chance, a period of reflection and rehabilitation. After all, isn't forgiveness a cornerstone of any civilized society, especially one that claims to be guided by Christian values? But here's the rub. The monarchy isn't just a family, it's an institution. It's a symbol, a brand, a carefully constructed narrative of duty, service, and unwavering integrity. And in that context, Lola's actions weren't just a childish prank. They were a direct assault on the very foundations of the crown. Imagine the message it would have sent if Charles had simply shrugged it off, a gentle reprimand and a slap on the wrist. It would have reeked of favoritism, of one rule for the royal family and another for everyone else. It would have validated the public's deepest cynicism about the monarchy, the perception that privilege trumps justice, that blood is thicker than water, even when that blood is tainted with envy and malice. Charles, in his decisive action, sent a different message, a powerful one. He showed that no one, not even the Queen's granddaughter, is above the standards expected of those who represent the crown. He demonstrated that integrity matters, that actions have consequences, and that the monarchy is committed to upholding the values it claims to embody. It was a calculated risk, of course. Some will always see him as a cold, unfeeling autocrat, banishing a young woman for a moment of foolishness. But others will see him as a strong leader, willing to make difficult decisions to protect the institution he has sworn to serve. The truth, as always, probably lies somewhere in between. As for Camilla, she found herself in an impossible position, a grandmother's love pitted against the demands of her role as queen. Her face, the moment Charles announced his verdict, spoke volumes. It wasn't just sadness or disappointment, it was a raw, visceral pain, the agony of watching a family fracture, of knowing that her own efforts to elevate Lola had backfired so spectacularly. Responsibility? Of course she bears some. Perhaps she indulged Lola too much, shielded her from the realities of life, fostered a sense of entitlement that ultimately led to her downfall. But let's not forget that Camilla has always been an outsider, a woman who had to fight for her place in the royal family. Maybe she saw in Lola a chance to rewrite her own story, to create a legacy of acceptance and belonging. Ironically, her efforts to protect Lola may have inadvertently contributed to her undoing. Ultimately, Lola's choices were her own. She succumbed to envy, allowed it to fester, and acted with deliberate cruelty. While Camilla may have played a role in shaping Lola's character, she can't be held entirely responsible for the choices her granddaughter made in that small, quiet room at Windsor Castle. The real tragedy, perhaps, is that Lola had so much potential. Beauty, intelligence, privilege, the world was at her feet. But she allowed envy to consume her, blinding her to the opportunities she had and leading her down a path of self-destruction. It's a cautionary tale, a reminder that true worth isn't found in titles or accolades, but in character, in kindness, and in the ability to rise above the petty insecurities that can poison even the most privileged lives. And in the end, it was Louise, the quiet, unassuming artist who emerged as the true embodiment of those values, a beacon of grace and resilience in a world desperately in need of both. Lola vanished from the headlines almost as quickly as she'd appeared. One minute, her face was plastered across every tabloid. The next, she was a ghost, airbrushed from the royal narrative. Whispers circulated. Exile in a remote Scottish estate, a convent in Italy, a quiet life under an assumed name in Argentina. The truth, predictably, was less sensational. She retreated to a family property in the countryside, a sprawling manor house far removed from the gilded cages of royal life. No screaming headlines there, just silence, and the slow, agonizing process of rebuilding a shattered life. Did she learn her lesson? Did she grapple with the enormity of her actions? Did she find redemption? Those answers remain locked behind the high walls of that estate. What we do know is that the world she craved, the world of glittering galas and designer gowns, was forever closed to her. The doors of Windsor Castle remained firmly shut, and the stain of envy proved impossible to erase. Louise, on the other hand, continued to blossom. The art world embraced her, not just because of her royal connections, but because of her talent. Her paintings commanded high prices, and she used her platform to champion environmental causes, becoming a powerful voice for conservation. She never spoke publicly about the incident with Lola, maintaining a dignified silence that only amplified her grace. Some might see her story as a fairy tale, the virtuous artist triumphing over the wicked socialite. But life is rarely so neat. Louise, despite her success, carried the weight of that day with her. The knowledge that someone she barely knew harbored such intense resentment, that her art could be the target of such maliciousness, left a scar. She became more guarded, more cautious, less willing to expose herself to the harsh glare of public scrutiny. The incident, while ultimately strengthening her resolve, also stole a piece of her innocence. And what of Charles? Did he ever second-guess his decision? Did he ever feel a pang of regret for the young woman he had banished? Doubtful. He is a king, first and foremost, and kings are rarely afforded the luxury of sentimentality. He did what he believed was necessary to protect the crown, and he moved on. But one can imagine, in the quiet moments before sleep, the image of Lola's tear-stained face flickering in his memory. A reminder that even in the most privileged of worlds, envy and bitterness can take root, with devastating consequences. Camilla undoubtedly suffered the most. Torn between her loyalty to the crown and her love for her granddaughter, she was forced to watch as Lola's life imploded. She likely visited Lola in her exile, offering comfort and support, but the bond between them was irrevocably damaged. The incident served as a stark reminder of the burdens of royalty, the sacrifices required to maintain the illusion of perfection. It also exposed the vulnerability of even the most powerful figures, the pain of watching a loved one fall from grace. The story of Lola Parker Bowles is not just a tale of envy and destruction. It's a reflection on the corrosive power of ambition, the pressures of royal life, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. It's a reminder that even in a world of privilege and power, character matters, and that true worth is measured not by titles or accolades, but by the choices we make and the values we uphold. And in the end, it was the artist, not the socialite, who left an enduring mark on the canvas of history.